Heading over to the AFC South, we're going to look at the Tennessee Titans, Tom. A rather disappointing year. I think it was 7 losses on the trot to finish the season. What do you think of them heading into the offseason? Are we going to be looking at a complete rebuild? Do you think with Mike Vrabel in tow, they will avoid said rebuild? Or
I think it's really difficult, and I think the Titans are a team who perennially are just people don't believe in them coming into every season. I know I don't. I always feel like that they don't have enough star power, and it's very tricky to believe in them. And then Mike Vrabel does such a great coaching job with them that they end up turning out these good seasons. And even this year, if it wasn't for Ryan Tannehill's injury, then perhaps you can talk yourself into them being able to scrape into the playoffs. I don't think they would have been able to do any damage in the playoffs. But yeah, and now they're at this kind of crossroads. The NFL told us what they thought about Malik Willis when he came into the draft. You know, back this time last year, there was, Daniel Jeremiah at one point had him number 2 going in the draft, but he falls to the 3rd round. And now they're at a point where Ryan Tannehill looks to be, he didn't break 20 points in a single game this year. So for fantasy, he's definitely done. He's not rushing the ball as much as he used to. Last year, he had 7 rushing touchdowns. The year before, he had 5. This year, he only had 2. So for fantasy, he's really taken a step back. And his level of play has really dropped in general. He had 10 big-time throws this year, which is down from 17 last year. Back-to-back years with a touchdown percentage below 4.5%. When he was useful for fantasy, that was up above 7%. So I think the Titans now are at a point where they're seeing what we're seeing in fantasy, and that he's not performing at the highest level, and they're really at a crossroads because they're going to have to decide whether they want to move on from him or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fascinating off-season for them, isn't it? It's the quarterback dilemma. A lot of people talked about that Ryan Tannehill contract, how they can save money if they move on from him, whether Malik Willis is going to be the answer. I think, look, Mike Vrabel, to me, has said everything you need to know about Malik Willis. When their season was on the line, they had to win. They went and signed a quarterback off somebody else's practice squad, and Malik Willis sat on the bench. So, yeah, I think that, to me, this whole roster is screaming for a complete tear it down, let's rebuild, and let's look at kind of 2024 and beyond. Looking at some of the contracts, obviously, you talk about Tennessee Titans and fantasy. We need to talk about Derrick Henry. It feels like people have been trying to write him off and send him off to the fantasy graveyard for the past probably 3 years. He keeps kind of producing. He keeps going. He could potentially be cut at the end of the year. His contract allows the Titans to save some money if they move on from him. Do you think that we're going to see Derrick Henry moved? Do you think he could get released, or do you think it's going to be another year where he could put up some competent fantasy numbers?
I think that depending on if he ends up in a different situation, that's possibly the case. I mean, this is a guy who's had 68 touchdowns in his last 5 seasons. So all he does is produce and show the doubters that he can still keep going. His 82% opportunity share led all running backs this season. So, even though we've seen the guys behind him getting a little bit more work at times, he's still absolutely dominant. And what really held him up this year was he had a career-high 41 targets, which is 10 more than ever before. So it was another year where I went into best ball drafts and I wasn't looking to get a lot of Derrick Henry, and I didn't end up with a lot of Derrick Henry. But depending where he ends up next year, if the Titans do move on from him, as you can see on the screen, he's got 1 year remaining on that contract. And like you said, they could move him on if they wanted to. I don't think the Titans will get any kind of trade return for him, and I think it would probably be better for the player if they just released him. But, yeah, I mean, if he goes to the right kind of team with a poor running back room, then perhaps we see a team not lean on him quite as heavily as the Titans have had to do over the last few years and save his legs, and then he has those big games. But I'm not sure he'll be a kind of starter that you'd want to be relying on in Dynasty every week. But it might be, if he ends up falling down a few rounds in best ball, that he can be someone we see as a value.
Yeah, I think for me, the key stat with Derrick Henry is that it's a career low in yards per attempt, but a lot of that is come from yards before contact. It's a career low in yards before contact. He is still produced at a similar level in terms of yards after contact. And to me, that shows that it's not necessarily a Derrick Henry issue. It's an offensive line issue. We know with Derrick Henry and his running style, he needs a little bit more space to get those legs going and to get moving than the average running back. He's not a Le'Veon Bell that's going to dance behind the line of scrimmage to pick up, to create space. He needs space created for him. And I think that, if the Titans do move on from him, it could be really interesting if he goes to a team that's got a good running offensive line. It could kind of almost reignite him, and he could have a little nice fantasy swan song.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also worth noting that this week the Titans moved on from offensive coordinator Todd Browning. So do they bring in someone who can use Derrick Henry in a more better way that suits his age at the moment? That could be something that gives him a new lease of life. So I don't necessarily think it's a certainty that they move on from Derrick Henry, because at the end of the day, the Titans do love Derrick Henry. He's been a big part of the team for the last few years. And I'd say the wide receiver room is far more of a problem than the running back room.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We've been very negative about the Titans so far. Let's bring a little bit of positivity to this. We had a really interesting kind of performance down the stretch from Chigoziem Okonkwo. What do you think, Tom, of him moving forward? Is he going to be a guy that you're going to be potentially targeting as that sort of middle to late round tight end in those best ball drafts?
I think this is the kind of guy who we're going to spend a lot of the fantasy offseason talking about. We've seen this with tight ends before. Tight ends such a wasteland, but we talk tight ends up so much because we're desperate for them to become usable. And Okonkwo, he really did have a great breakout down the stretch from weeks 12 to 17, 21 receptions, which was seventh most amongst tight ends. He had 2.5 yards per route run, which was the third most, not amongst tight ends, but amongst all pass catchers. Austin Hooper's a free agent this offseason as well. So if the Titans decide to push the chips in on Okonkwo, it really could be an interesting situation for fantasy. I just hope he doesn't get talked up too much. But we're talking about a guy who was available on waivers this season and wasn't drafted in best ball drafts.